Shine.fm presents Stronger Together, a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationships, and community. Here's Seth Tower Hurd.
This is Stronger Together. It's a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationship, and community. My name is Seth Tower Hurd, and this is a standalone episode, but also the launch of another show on the Shine.fm podcast network. If you get this on the radio, search Shine.fm podcast wherever you subscribe to audio, or you can always check out the video by searching Shine.fm on Facebook or YouTube. This is a little bit of an inter-Shine.fm show, as a matter of fact. I wanted to ask some big questions and some tough questions about, particularly as we're raising kids, why is there that thing where so many of them fall away from faith, at least for a while, somewhere between 18 and 25? And statistically, a lot of them find their way back to Jesus and to church and realize that they have a hunger going on there. But why do so many of them leave? Brian from Shine.fm joins me along with his son Jake, and we're going to talk a little bit later about the show they're doing together. But is that a heavy enough question to start with? Why do they fall away? Yeah. I mean, you've worked in a lot of different facets of ministry. We know that about 80% of kids in the average church that go through youth group will not be in church within 1 year. Right.
So why do they fall away?
Well, I just actually turned 18, so I'm kind of in that time phase right now. But I kind of think it's the feeling of being unaccepted or your voice isn't heard in the church. I feel like a lot of the older generations in the church just make the mistake of oh, you're still a child, you're still growing. And so that's what I kind of think of it, because I've experienced that myself. But my parents have supported me. I know my pastor supports me because I'm kind of really wanted in the church with music and media and kids church. So I think that's just the feeling of not being wanted, that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. There was a research project that was done. It's been many years ago now, actually by a large church in Costa Rica in Central America, and it said the number one way of closing the back door of the church is to get people involved. And I think it's sort of that same kind of thing. What I know, because I am a closet cultural anthropologist. I love studying cultures and generations and just people, because we're in ministry and it's all about people. And what we know of millennials, and just to be clear, I am a Gen Xer. I'm an older Gen Xer, a few years away from a baby boomer, I guess.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
So I have a lot of baby boomer tendencies, even though I'm a Gen Xer. Jake is right on the line of millennial, and they call him Gen Z. I hate that title. I like calling them digital natives, which is the other title for him. So he's right on the line, and he's probably more of a digital native with a little bit of millennial tendencies as well, whatever those are. I mean, who can define them? But characteristically, when you're looking at millennials and digital natives, they want to express themselves and they want to make a difference now. So as a church, we have to give them space. They want their voices heard. They want to express themselves. We can't tell them what to do. In fact, they know better how to reach their generation. We just need to resource them and encourage them and turn them loose to do it. And I don't think we do that enough. Is that one of the reasons why people leave and walk away from the faith? Well, again, that research study in Costa Rica said that the number one way to close the back door of the church is get them in ministry, get them involved, put them to work, whatever they're passionate about. And I think that that's needed today in our church here in the U.S.
Mm-hmm. This is Stronger Together. It's a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationship, and community. This is both an episode of this show, looking at bigger issues, and the launch of a new show on the Shine.fm podcast network called Kitchen Table. I asked that question because I think that one of the reasons that so many people wind up leaving church between 18 and 25 is because when they ask tough questions, they get the "because I told you so" answer. because
Yeah.
Christianity's like that, because that's what we believe. And that doesn't actually help in any way if you've got a kid going through doubts. And, I got to say, as somebody who's about to enter the parenthood stage here in 4 months, Brian, you're a Gen Xer. I'm right on that line between Gen X and millennial, although I'm officially a millennial. And then Jake is kind of age-wise, right, between millennial and digital native, right? And so my child will probably be a part of a whole nother generation, but there are still things that should be done, in every kid's life and every teenager's life to help them understand and own their faith. And, it seems like when those steps are skipped over, it doesn't go as well. And obviously you guys got those steps right because of where Jake's sitting at 18 years old in life.
Well, we hope so. Is there a secret formula? Absolutely not. Are there steps that can prevent it? If they are, I wish someone would teach me. I think that's the big misconception of parenting. There is no guidebook.
Yeah.
And when it comes to faith parenting, there's definitely not a guidebook. But I can just learn from, my experiences when I was a teenager. What happens is when a child grows up, their faith relationship is really the shirt tails of their parents if their parents are believers. And so for many years, I myself, I was just riding along on the shirt tail of my mother more than my father. And I think every teenager, young adult comes to that I don't want to call it a crisis point, but some kind of point in their relationship that they realize this has to be more than just me riding shirt tail. This has to be my own, and I have to embrace it and make it my own. And I think as parents of those teenagers or young adults, we have to not push them, but we have to say, hey, you have to figure this out on your own, man. You got the freedom to figure it out. Some of them walk away. It's sort of like what the Amish do, right? They have that year right when they're going into adulthood where they can go away from the Amish community and live that life of sin or whatever, and then decide, come back and commit to this for the rest of their life or stay away. I don't think that's healthy at all, but there comes that point where he's got to make it his own walk.
Yeah. But Jake, is it cool to ask, you're 18 right now. Can you look at like a year or an issue within faith that was just tough for you that you really kind of had to wrestle through, or maybe it was just kind of a stage of life. You're like, man, freshman year was just so tough because of a certain reason.
Yeah. So I think my toughest year was like freshman year.
Of high school.
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, good guess.
Yeah. So, because I was in a public school. I grew up a missionary kid, so I grew up in like a private school, from like 2 to 9, and so like I just had like the cookie cutter, like give me the Jesus answers, like all that stuff. And then when we moved back to the U.S., I went to public school, and like it's a whole different atmosphere and a whole different, like, just relationship wise. And then like I was making kind of friends of my own off, like they weren't my parents' friends anymore. And so I think the need to fit in for me was because I'm a very social person. Mm-hmm. So I think the need to fit in with all the other kids led me to making poor decisions. And so that led to freshman year. And so that was really like, I did not have a good standing in my faith, but my parents were super supportive about that. They walked me through it after that. So I think that was my hardest year as a believer for that. But I think the transition period of like becoming having my own faith, not just writing off on my parents' back, was this year, my senior year of high school, because with my little brother has had a rough year this year, and so I always was doubting God. I was like, why is God doing bad things into good people? Like, my little brother hasn't done anything wrong. Like, why? Like, just why? So that was my biggest doubt, and so I really got into the Word and started praying a lot. And so that helped me grow a lot and gave me a lot of answers. And my parents were supportive through the whole thing.
We'll actually do an episode about my youngest son, his brother. That'll be a good episode for sure.
This is Stronger Together. It's a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationship, and community. In this one, we're talking about parenting. We're also launching a new show on the Shine.fm podcast network. Brian from Shine.fm and his son Jake are going to be doing that on their own. So you're getting to meet him here, and then you can go ahead later on in the week. You can download the first episode, which, I just said it, so hopefully you guys are going to be done.
We'll get it done.
You're going to be done. But Brian, can you talk about those 2 years with Jake as we talk about those, those years that your kids are going to go through something tough where they're going to have to meet Jesus on their own. So freshman year, and then this year you really saw him take on a lot. How tough is that as a parent to be able to let go some and realize you got to trust God with this element?
We do something in our denomination that we're a part of. We don't do infant baptism per se. We don't say you can't be done, but we do what's called a dedication. And so when you have a child, typically when they're an infant, you are dedicating that child back to the Lord. You're basically saying, God has given us this child. We commit to raising this child in the faith, but we also know that we need God. So we're dedicating this child back to God, and whatever God's will for this child is, it's God's will. But then we also, during this little ceremony type things we'll do in our churches, is the pastor, as he's doing this dedication, will then challenge the congregation to also commit, sort of like the Hillary Clinton, it takes a village kind of thing. We believe it takes a church to raise a child. And so that's something important within faith community, I think, that as parents, when we get to the crisis, I hate using the word crisis, it's not necessarily a crisis, but to the point of the faith struggle, let's put it that way. It's not just us as parents when you're a part of a community. We sit down, we talk to Jake, we encourage Jake. We know he's struggling with this, but we also know and we realize that during adolescent years, this tension happens. It will happen. I mean, if you look back on your own life and remember when you were a teenager, guess what? The tension happened in my own life, and I had to work through this. And so as parents, we're there. We're encouraging them, but also we've got pastors, and if your church has a pastor that works specifically with youth, teachers, different people in their life that can help speak into that. And just allowing your child, or your teenager, I should say, to just letting them know it's okay that they are questioning about their faith, because we all have questions. I'm convinced that the first thing that happens when someone passes away and arrives in heaven, if that's how it happens in that moment, because I have all kinds of questions with no answers. But I have faith that I don't need the answers.
Yeah.
And I think when I cross that gate that they talk about, my first expression is going to be, oh, because all those answers will just be given to me in a way that I'll understand everything at that moment. And it really won't matter. And that's the crazy thing. So just letting your child know that we all have questions. We all have struggles that, just like Scripture says, we've all fallen short. God's grace is there. We all learn together, and it's a process of continually learning no matter how old you are. I'm continually learning. My parents are continually learning, no matter what generation you come from.
Yeah. This is Stronger Together. It's a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationship, and community. We're really zoning in on parenting with Brian and Jake, who are also the hosts of a new show on the Shine.fm podcast network called The Kitchen Table. And just this idea of open dialogue, right? I'm going to use kind of an extreme example, but maybe if you're old enough, you kind of understand this old school mentality.
Are you pointing to me?
No. Well, I was going to say, I remember, and my parents weren't like this, but I remember families growing up in church that say, oh, well, we're not going to eat at Applebee's because they serve alcohol.
Right.
And then, the kid gets out on their own and they go to Applebee's and they found out they have amazing dessert. But the problem is if everything is because I said so, when it comes to conversations of faith and parenting, because I said so, we don't eat at Applebee's, and then I'm going to keep this fairly family friendly because it's on the air, but we know that as far as the loss of life of young people, 1 in 5 right now is due to the opioid crisis.
Right.
And I look at that and I'm going, how can you not, if you're 16 to 25, how can you not know of the incredible dangers around these substances because of just the crisis that our nation is in? And I have to wonder if part of it isn't everything I ever got told was because I said so, and then I got into increasingly risky behavior, and when it became to the opioid crisis, it's like, oh, well, that was probably fine because it was another because I said so, and nothing bad happened through the rest of them. So if there isn't authenticity and continuing conversation, I think that that's a risk that you run, and not just as a parent, but all the kids, in your community, nieces, nephews, kids you volunteer with at church, that because I said so answer is just so dangerous.
Yeah, it is. And really, you need to give a legitimate answer. We're all figuring this faith walk out together. It's a journey. We're all at different points of the journey. We're all at different points of understanding. One of the things that, to consume alcohol or not. Yeah. I come from a denomination that has certain positions on alcohol. I work for a university that has positions on it. And so if I see a believer who is consuming alcohol socially, I don't have a problem with that personally, but I choose not to. And the reason I choose not to is because my father was an alcoholic, recovered. They never say they recovered. I believe my father's recovered. And I have a brother who struggles with it and is trying to recover. Mm-hmm. And so Scripture talks about us being a stumbling block for our brother, and literally that's it. So I choose not to consume because I don't want to be a stumbling block to others who struggle with it, even in a social sense, and there's all kinds of different arguments about it. But that's an answer, okay? That's a legitimate answer from me that if he ever asks the question, well, what about social drinking? Mm-hmm. Well, this is my answer. He's got to figure out his own answer. This is my answer.
Yeah. Brian, can you tell me about when you said that there's a faith struggle in everybody's teenage years, right?
Yeah.
What was that tough thing for you, and what have you told both of your kids about it?
The tough thing for me. Surrounding yourself with the right people. And again, you have to realize that when you're a teenager, you surround yourself with teenagers. And guess what? We're all going through a faith struggle. One of my good friends growing up was a preacher's kid. Same kind of struggles. I experimented with alcohol at a time. I didn't do a ton of rebellion per se, but I could have easily gone down the wrong path. Mm-hmm. I could have. But it wasn't. I just think my parents, honestly, my parents did not have lots of faith conversations with me. Okay. And now that he's 18, and sort of the reason why we're doing our own podcast is I want to have these faith conversations, and I hope, and I know I didn't wait that long, because we do have faith conversations, but they're brief little things. So I want us to have some serious faith conversations, and if it helps other people have serious faith conversations, great. But my father, major introvert, does not like to, talk about things beyond hunting guns and building things out of wood that are very heavy. But I had people in my life. Again, it takes a community of faith that I could have faith conversations with. Church camps and conferences that I went to, they were vitally important to me. So again, I don't even remember the question you asked initially.
Oh, no, just what was the... I asked you what were the tough things about faith for you as a teenager, and, how did you talk to your kids about it? And I think that answers it right there.
Well, it's interesting because generationally, I think the culture questions are different today for Jake's generation than the culture questions of my generation. I went to another evangelical denomination's youth event once, and the youth worker was trying to convince me on a different position on a social issue, and I stood my ground and kind of made them upset. But I think just culture's teaching you one thing, the public school's teaching you one thing, and as followers of Christ, we're like, but I'm learning this in church, and when I read my Bible, it says this, and so there's this constant tension, and so faith struggle happens because we're trying to find our own place as adolescents. We're getting off those shirt tails of our parents' relationship with Christ, and we're trying to find our own place. And Jake and I, we've had conversations about culture and social issues. I'm sure these are going to come up in our podcast. And he's like, but what about this? And I'm like, well, this is what I believe, and
And it's almost one of the reasons I'm so excited about this show launching is that things are moving so much faster. And I'm going to give one example of that. Kind of back to the old school, because I said so, because we go to church and we do things this way, right? The old school answer on that would be, we don't watch these TV shows, we don't watch these movies. Okay. And hey, I'm not saying you shouldn't have standards in what your entertainment viewing is, right?
Right.
However, this year is the year that people are consuming more content on video like this than they are actually watching television. Right. So all of a sudden, your old school answer of, we watch this, not this, it doesn't actually, as of this year, work. Especially when one of the most popular things that your younger son is into, younger kids love watching other people play video games.
Yeah, it's both of them. It's all about YouTube.
Yes,
forget cable television. We don't even have cable. So
I'm more Netflix.
You're more Netflix. Okay, yes.
But he used to be YouTube. But my 8-year-old is definitely a YouTube watcher.
Oh yeah.
So with your 8-year-old, I mean, you really have no choice but to be talking from a young age about choosing appropriate content, because you could have somebody on there that is on a perfectly fine medium, be that YouTube or Twitch or something like that, that you can get a lot of good stuff from. They can learn a lot of stuff from. They can get a lot of positive faith content from, or they can get somebody who is a very cultish personality who's spewing a lot of really, really upsetting things.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that we do not teach in the United States, and we really rely upon parents to teach their children, and we kind of fail at doing it, and it's actually taught in elementary schools outside of the United States, even across the border in Canada, and that's media literacy. They teach that in elementary school, media literacy, and it has nothing to do with the values of the media you're consuming, but just the messaging and how all messaging and all media has an agenda, and it can be skewed. And we don't teach that here. We've culturally relied on parents to do it, and we've kind of failed in doing that. So, absolutely. I want to know exactly what my kids are consuming media-wise. Even an 8-year-old watching someone else play a video game so he can better learn how to play the video game, which makes no sense to me whatsoever. But that's what he at 8 years old. What do you want to be when you grow up? Oh, I want to be a YouTuber playing video games. That's what he wants to be. I'm like, oh, help me.
Well, I can't speak to our, to Lansing and Indianapolis markets, but I can say one of the highest paid video gamers in the world is actually, under the Shine.fm signal in Chicago.
Sure, yeah. And how old is that person?
He's in his early 20s and making tens of millions of dollars. Yeah. It's like NBA player money. To use a more mild example, you can YouTube Logan Paul and see why he was banned from YouTube. But a vlogger who was really popular, I would say, with like 8 to 16-year-olds. That's probably his core audience. Yeah. Kind of a comedy type thing. He did some other kind of things to also get him banned, but he was like punching people and pushing people down for just like no reason, and YouTube eventually wound up demonetizing him and kicking him off. Well, if your 8-year-old just sees that as normal, that's how you get internet famous, is punching people and pushing them down, there's probably going to be some negative ramifications for that.
Yeah.
Let's wrap this thing up talking about culture. Okay. By the way, This is Stronger Together, and this episode's about parenting, and it's also the new launch of a show called The Kitchen Table with Brian from Shine.fm and his 18-year-old son, Jake. So, Jake, just give me I'm always fascinated by this conversation. What is big with high school kids at the moment? I mean, just name the social media network they most communicate on, the TV show or the YouTube or the Netflix kind of channel that's the biggest right now. Kind of who are the thought leaders, and how's everybody talking to each other?
Well, I think the biggest social media platform right now is Snapchat. I think hands down, either Snapchat or Instagram, that's kind of the right hand in hand. But like the biggest things right now are Fortnite. I know Netflix is really huge, and I mean, everyone seems to be watching like 13 Reasons Why, The Office, like all those really popular shows right now.
How many times do you watch The Office over and over?
Oh, I've probably watched it 10 times through.
You've watched the whole series 10 times.
It's all about binging.
It's so... Okay,
Yes.
yeah, binging is not the best thing to do,
No, it's
but
not.
it's a good way to spend your day.
It's a good way to spend. Okay, so there. I feel like there's almost 3 episodes of this new show in there. Number 1, the amount of TV in a sitting. What's healthy, what's not healthy. Like if the sun comes up and goes down and you haven't been outside, maybe that's a little too much. The second thing in here, let's address these two real briefly, because these are not solid answers that you can just land on one thing. Snapchat, it's really tough for parents or anybody to be monitoring what's going on because these messages all go away and they go so fast, right? And yet, you probably can only keep your kids off of it for so long. So it becomes a media literacy issue.
Yeah. Right, yeah. You want to take that?
I had Snapchat, I think, freshman year, and that was when I was starting to make bad choices with it. So they made me delete it, and I didn't have Snapchat for 2 years.
Yeah.
I didn't get it back until junior year. But then, so I kind of took it upon myself as, I had an accountability partner with one of my good friends, and I started deleting people that, I just knew were, not good people, not, they were just bad for my past. And so that was kind of, my, take initiative to it. And so also me seeing a bunch of middle schoolers in Snapchat, I'm just I tell them be careful, you don't want to do things that will lead to bad, because it's going to cause one thing after, and it's going to roller coaster.
And more studies are coming out about what's the appropriate age to give someone a smartphone. And I think the latest I saw was, if you're not 13 years old, why do you need it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
My 8-year-old, he's been asking for a phone since he was 6. Yeah. So, and it's not going to happen anytime soon.
Well, and if it really is just a case of the kid needs to call you to tell you that they need to be picked up from practice, flip phone. And even if you want to get more basic than that, there are phones that can only call pre-assigned numbers. Yeah. So they can only call the aunt and uncle as a backup, and the grandparents as a backup to that. If you want to keep it to 3 numbers. And so that's a way to keep it pretty simple. If your second grader really needs to call you after soccer practice, that's a way to pull it off. I'm going to give a little bit of a warning here and say, if you got kids in the car, we're going to ask this last question about the Netflix show 13 Reasons Why. I actually would like to do an entire episode of Stronger Together, or maybe you guys do it coming up. One of the things I do in life is I'm a film and TV critic with Relevant Magazine. You can read my work over there. When 13 Reasons Why first came out, I thought that the number of people upset over it was way overblown. Mm-hmm. And I watched the show myself, and honestly, I was horrified at the behavior that the show was essentially glorifying. Mm-hmm. I would say this is the number 1 show for teenagers right now, as far as I can tell. And the number of parents I've talked to that that maybe from a blended family situation where you have full-time custody of your kid, but then the kid goes to the other parent's house for the weekend and watches every episode of the season. There's a lot more exposure. Or they're at a friend's house and they're sneaking 13 Reasons Why. Mm-hmm. This is a show that deals with almost every heavy topic that you could possibly imagine, and it doesn't do it well. It's not necessarily that they're dealing with it, it's that in almost every situation they're glorifying the negative choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how have you guys talked about this? And Jake, how many of your friends watch this? In high school in general, so think about all the way down to freshmen, right?
I think
We have actually not talked about the show much. I know that my wife has watched it, and they talk about it.
Yeah, we talk about it.
I mean, we've had discussions on, the main topic of the show, I believe, is suicide, correct?
Yeah, season 1 is suicide, season 2 is sexual harassment.
Okay.
But the amount, I think almost all of my close friends have seen the show, and a lot of people in the high school that I graduated from have seen the show. And it's a small Christian school.
Yeah. So multiply that by, if your kid hasn't seen it, assume that 90% of their friends have.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I have to say, as a film and TV critic, I thought people were getting ridiculously over upset before watching it and how the show is billed, which is more of like a pro-life, pro every person has value. That's what I was expecting. I watched season 1 and I was just like, emotionally, I was messed up for a few days. And I'm 35. I'm past this. I can only imagine how those emotions get multiplied if you're in your teens watching other kids your age behave like this.
Yeah, it's an intense show. It was, I didn't binge it. That was one show that I could not binge. It was just like too much to handle if I watched a bunch of episodes. But yeah, it led. I can admit that it did lead to good conversations with my friends about like suicide prevention and like sexual harassment stuff. But it's a very hard show to watch. But it was a topic that I thought needed to be culturally brought to, because suicide is, especially like in our area, we've had so many suicides in the past 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Brian, how did you guys, just as we wrap this thing up, and then I want to plug the fact that your own show is launching again, but how do you guys talk through, when we talked about media literacy, when there's really heavy stuff like this that, can't be avoided as a parent? Are you kind of trying to get out in front of this, when the conversation is around teen suicide, because it's the biggest show on the planet for teenagers? As a parent, are you trying to get out in front of that and be the first one to talk about it with them?
Well, we actually, we've had discussions on suicide before the show even launched. Mm-hmm. So, he knows exactly what that is and the implications of that. So media literacy, he knows what he can watch and what he can't watch, what he can consume media-wise. He's 18 now, so he can make those kinds of decisions. As a parent, when you're a teenager gets older and older, they make more and more of those decisions. But all along, we've raised him understanding media and how that affects people, how it can be a benefit, but also a detriment to mental health, to spiritual health, by what you consume in media. So there's a trust factor too.
Yeah, and we talked about how much more difficult things are through technology. Actually, if we can say something good as far as having conversation about what your kids are watching and knowing what they're watching. When they're 5, it's pretty easy, right? But what's interesting about the streaming world now, that's probably a positive, is that 15 years ago, if you were watching something, you were watching it on cable and there was no footprint or no record. Now, if your kids are watching something, within 2 clicks, you know what they've watched this week.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yes,
yeah.
That's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, that's how they kept a hold of me.
The show is called The Kitchen Table. You can check it out on Facebook, on YouTube, or by searching Shine.fm podcast wherever you're subscribing to audio. If you guys just want to kind of tell us maybe have you talked about what the first couple topics are going to be as we talk about, faith, the big stuff in life, and culture?
Every week we'll be discussing a faith issue. We'll talk about music because we both love music, and just a cultural aspect to everything. So faith, music, and culture will be a part of every episode.
Once again, you can search Shine.fm podcasts and also check out more content from Shine.fm on Facebook or YouTube. You can always go back and grab that there if you've heard and missed any part of this conversation on the radio. This is Stronger Together. Once again, search for The Kitchen Table on Shine.fm podcast or search Shine.fm on Facebook or YouTube to check out that new content. This is Shine.fm.
That was Stronger Together, a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationships, and community. Subscribe to the Shine.fm podcast to catch every episode of Stronger Together, available on the iTunes podcast app and wherever podcasts are available.